course, the big news of the day is the local elections. We haven't, of course, yet got all of the results. They're still coming through, but it has been clear, hasn't it, that it has not been a good night for the Conservatives. Of course, all the opposition parties have seen gains, with Labour taking, and I mean there's been a lot of celebration about this, the constituency of Medway. The Lib Dems seized Windsor and Maidenhead. Alex, I'll start with you. What is your kind of key takeaway from some of the goings on? As I mentioned, we have not yet got the final results, but we've seen enough.
So, point one, it's a bad night for the Tories, and anyone who pretends otherwise is whistling Dixie. And that's just good to say that, first of all. Obviously, governments often do badly mid-term in local elections. This is worse than the norm. So that's point one. Point two is that it's not actually that great for Keir Starmer either. You've seen real surges for the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, and therefore, whilst point three is that local elections are not great predictors for general elections, that might imply a split on the left, which means it's not all fantastic for the opposition leader either.
Do you think it's fantastic for the opposition leader, Paul?
No. Keir Starmer and the Labour Party clearly have not sealed the deal with the electorate. I mean, when you think of where Tony Blair was just a year or two out from the 1997 general election,
miles away from
Labour absolutely smashed it and won, I think, a 179-seat landslide. The Labour Party at the moment are nowhere near that territory. So, I mean, I think Alex's assessment was reasonably accurate. I think it's evident that many people, many voters are falling out of love with the Tories, but are not necessarily falling in love with Labour. If you look at Labour's share of the vote compared to last time, it increased, but not by very much at all. They did make some inroads into red wall constituencies, into those areas, those local authority areas where they were heavily in favour of Brexit, and I think that will bring some solace to Keir Starmer. But look, he had a mountain to climb a few years ago. And whilst the Labour Party has unquestionably made some progress up that mountain, I think it's still a long, long way from the peak. So I think, to be honest, anybody who says that the general election is in the bag for the Labour Party is delusional. There is still everything to play for.
Well, yeah, the projected national share, the PNS, apparently has been estimated. It would put the Tories at 26%, Labour at 35% and Lib Dems at 20%. So basically, if all things was equal and it was the general election, it was mirroring this, that would be the result.
Well, of course, it doesn't mirror that, and there's a good couple of reasons why. The first is that not all of the country was voting yesterday. So let me do the objective thing before I do the subjective things. Objectively, much of the country didn't vote. It was only England and only bits of England. Also, objectively, local elections are different, not just because of much lower turnout, but because of the much stronger appearance of independent candidates. The seats that were being contested from 2019, 25% of them were held by independents. So it's quite hard to read. Even if you're Keir Starmer's biggest champion, you might argue it's hard to display that kind of momentum that he wants to show when so many seats were held before by independents. But the other thing I think is worth bearing in mind is this. The comparisons that Paul was making, I think, are the right ones. What are the seismic moments in British politics? This wasn't one of them. This feels much more like the Neil Kinnock on one side or Gordon Brown on the other side of the Tony Blair seismic moment, and the Kinnock school of thought, which is one more heave, with an 80-seat majority to overcome, plus the boundary changes. It's not going to. That implies to me it's not enough in one go. Keir Starmer has not seen the kind of momentum he needs to see, and I'm saying that whilst conceding bad night for the Tories.
Paul, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the big problem for Keir Starmer at the moment is I think he understands where the Labour Party needs to go. He understands the trajectory that's necessary to get the Labour Party into 10 Downing Street. I think the problem is largely he's shackled by a party, large parts of which simply do not want to go there. They are very uncomfortable with the kind of faith, family and flag stuff. They are very uncomfortable with the fact that he's said, look, we've got to embrace Brexit, it's done, it's over. Some people, I think, would like to reopen that wound. And the problem there is that projects the party nationally to the electorate as a party that is still a party, really. Elements of the far left, student radicals, social activists and middle-class liberals living in our fashionable cities and university towns. And whilst that remains the case, I think that there are going to be large elements of red wall constituencies that are simply uncomfortable about going back to the Labour Party. The Labour Party, in short, the Labour Party hasn't yet changed enough.
And there was a lot, well, not a lot, but a bit of talk within the SNP, basically suggesting that they feel that they would hold the balance of power in the next election. Do you agree with that?
Well, this there's two things. The first is the SNP's most important lesson to us of late hasn't been about whether they'd hold power. It's about how quickly politics can change. We've got a year to go before the next general election. We saw an SNP implosion in like a fortnight. So people that say they can predict now what a general election over a year away is going to look like based on these results, I think it is wrong. But the second SNP point is this. We didn't have local elections in Scotland this time round. Had we done, it's very likely we'd have seen a real plummeting of support for the SNP, given what's been going on recently, arrests and all. So it seems to me if that's what they think, they should think again.
And what do you think about the whole SNP thing?
Well, I think the danger for the Labour Party is if they are seen to be too close to the SNP. The truth is that whilst the SNP is popular in Scotland, although not so much now, of course, in England I think there is a great deal of hostility to the SNP. So the Labour Party, I think, would do well to distance itself from the SNP and certainly not get into any discussions about possible arrangements with the SNP in the event of a hung parliament post the election.
Even if they need to, pragmatically, we've seen at elections in the past the association is really harmful for
Exactly.
Labour. So even if in HQ they're thinking, well, we may need to do a deal with the SNP, they shouldn't say anything
don't
like
make that public.
They've really got to play it down.
Let me ask the B word, because I've heard a lot of rumours and a lot of conversations today saying, from certain camps saying this is a display of anti-Brexit sentiment, a display of people saying actually it's time to reverse Brexit. Did you see any of that or feel any of that?
No, and I think on the right there's as much kind of antipathy for, inverted commas, not getting Brexit done or not having the Brexit that certain people wanted as much as there is on the left. I know it's not a left-right issue, but broadly speaking on the left are saying they want to unwind Brexit. What I can't deny, I think, looking at the results is, if there's one takeaway, it's not pro-Labour, clearly. I think it's anti-Tory sentiment. The difficulty for Starmer and the opposition is whether that unifies, and the splintering of the change of support in our country at the moment between Labour, Lib Dem and Greens, on one view, taken to a national election, that's not all bad for the Tory party. That could look like a split Labour, Lib Dem, Green vote in opposition for the Tories, and in a first past the post system, if your opponent's side is more divided than yours, that's not so bad.
Is that fair?
And the Brexit piece will carry the Tory party through in the red wall, because there's plenty of working class Labour people, traditional Labour people, who loaned their vote to the Tory party and still don't like what they see over their shoulder.
Is that fair?
Everything that the Labour Party does between now and election time has got to be geared towards winning back the hearts of mind and minds of people in the red wall. If they don't win those people back, they ain't going to win an election. So any suggestion from the Labour Party that we should revisit Brexit, any indulgence of that idea, I think would be suicidal. What the Labour Party needs to do is continue with the message: we accept Brexit. More than that, actually say we embrace Brexit. But more than that, we are going to.
Do you think they do though? Really?
No, not privately. Of course they don't. Most of them hate the idea, but tactically they realise it would be crazy to say that. But what they do have to do is to start using the language of people in working class, blue collar, post-industrial constituencies who are interested in issues like national security and immigration and law and order, and do want more traditional values upheld, and do have a bit of a small c conservative thread running through them. Those are the people who the Labour Party has frankly treated with contempt for the last 20 or 30 years. And as a result of that, they were annihilated in the polls. The Labour Party actually has been losing the working class vote since around 2000, I think. And that needs to be priority number one for the Labour Party. Start employing the sort of language that is going to win back the hearts and minds of those people.
And I was seeing what John Red was saying earlier on. He was saying the Tories are not Tory enough, and that was their problem. Do you agree with that?
I think it's a peculiar instinct to look at polling results, which shows if there is one clear winner, it's the Lib Dems doing well, with all the caveats about them doing better at local elections and low turnouts and so forth. It's a very funny thing to do, to look at a situation where the Lib Dems are surging and think we better move to the right. I accept the point that parties need to have defined, clear blue water between them and their opposition. But for me, at the moment, Rishi Sunak's best advantages are, one, that he seems to poll better than Keir Starmer as preferred Prime Minister, and two, a sense of calm and managerialism, as opposed, frankly, to his predecessors. You've got to double down on that, not double down on being more right-wing.
And let's talk at ID and turnout. So, Hull, where I'm from, turnout was about 22%. And yes, I do know that local elections are historically much lower than a general election, but still, if 80% there or thereabouts of the electorate just can't be bothered to turn out and vote for whatever reason, if I was involved in politics or councils or whatever, I'd be looking in the mirror tonight and asking myself, what is going wrong so that 80% or there or thereabouts literally do not turn out. I think that's appalling.
I think there's millions of people in this country who are completely alienated from the political system, not just at a local level, except in that turnouts generally are low in local elections, but at a national level as well. There is a huge body of people who are what you might call social democratic in outlook economically. You know, they believe in a higher minimum wage, they believe in trade union rights, you know, they believe in fairness and economic justice, redistribution of wealth, levelling up, etc. But at the same time are probably to the right on cultural issues, do take an interest in issues like national security and law and order and all those things I said before, want the small boats to end, want immigration sorted out. And those are the people who have been completely alienated by both parties, which have, over recent years, the main parties have embraced this kind of hyper-liberal, hyper-progressive agenda. Certainly Cameron put rocket boosters under it in the Tory party, and we know exactly what's been happening to the Labour Party over the last 30 years. So, in short, yeah, people are alienated from the political system, but for good reason, because no one speaks for them.
I've seen a lot on the left, Alex, blaming the ID, the photo ID, and saying that's why people haven't been turning out.
I mean, outside of a couple of campaigning organisations whose literal job it is to find that problem and to shout about it, the actual incidents of it being an issue are pretty small and isolated. Look, if you're an electoral officer, you're a returning officer, you don't want anything to go wrong. You don't want a single person to have a problem at the polls. But, you know, given what people were talking about, it's like the threat from Y2K. All these people ran around saying the sky was going to fall in, and we woke up, yeah, there were a couple of issues, but, you know, most of our, this is a point that doesn't seem to land with the people who talk about this the most, despite their position on Brexit. Most of our European neighbours use systems like this without any complaint or issue.